So hello and welcome back to our Healthcare FinTech webinar series. I'm Natalie Moore with Salucro, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by our panel of revenue cycle and treasury leaders as they discuss contactless payment strategies that are reshaping traditional patient payment experience. Our first guest today is Rebecca Truscott, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development here at Salucro, along with Ron Collins, System Manager, Merchant Card Operations at Common Spirit Health, Clint Jones, Vice President of Business Development at AccuReg, and Valerie Barkoff, Principal at Wyndham Brannan. As a takeaway from today's event, we'll also be providing you with our recently released ebook, Adapting to the Digital Payment Ecosystem. This ebook highlights 5 key recommendations targeted at helping revenue cycle leaders keep up with an evolving digital marketplace. You can access this ebook on the Handouts tab or on salucro.com at any time. So right now, let's hand it over to our panelists for a quick introduction. Rebecca, why don't you get us started?
Great, thanks Natalie, and thanks for coordinating this panel discussion today. Again, my name is Rebecca Truscott. I'm our Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Salucro. Salucro is a healthcare technology company exclusively focused on improving the patient payment and billing experience for healthcare providers. The majority of our footprint is here in the US with over 1,000 customers to date and actively expanding in various international markets as well. Thanks, Nat.
Great, thanks Rebecca. Ron?
Hi, Ron Collins. I am the System Manager for Merchant Card Operations for Common Spirit Health, formerly known as Dignity Health. We have since, over the course of the last few years, we've acquired Catholic Health Initiative, and together we now form Common Spirit Health. So we have grown from 3 states to 21 states and over 140 hospitals. And so we are now the largest not-for-profit healthcare organization in the country. I will say, coming from managing merchant card operations from 3 states to 21 states has been quite of a challenge. So it's more like we within 3 states, we were pretty successful in herding cats, but now try herding sea otters out in a large ocean environment. That's pretty much what our day-to-day is like today. So, but thank you for having me. Look forward to hearing from the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Ron. Sounds like you're staying busy. Clint?
Yeah, congratulations, Ron. That sounds like a great opportunity, but I'm sure it has its challenges as well. Clint Jones, I'm Vice President of Business Development at AccuReg, and AccuReg is a company that's dedicated to patient access solutions and accelerating cash, preventing denials, and patient satisfaction, and most recently engaging with the patient through Engage Care Patient, which is a full solution for patient engagement, digital intake, digital access, things like that. Been in healthcare for about 18 years. Had the pleasure of being on the provider side, the payer side, and now a partner. And I'm excited because of the work that we've done with Salucro over the last few years, and being here to help learn, but also maybe contribute a little bit to what's going on with payments and healthcare.
Thanks, Clint. Happy to have you here today. And last but not least, Valerie.
Hi, thank you guys for asking me to join the panel. So Valerie Barkoff, I lead the healthcare advisory practice for Wyndham Brannan. Wyndham Brannan is one of the oldest and largest CPA firms in the Southeast. And our healthcare advisory practice, we consider to be a niche practice where we focus solely on revenue cycle. Also the co-founder of a joint venture that we have called Shore Health, where we bring artificial intelligence into the revenue cycle. I have 25 plus years of experience. Clint's heard this before. I give myself the plus because I worked my way through college as a registrar. My experience is both in consulting, but in operations. In the middle of my career, I was the executive director of contracting and revenue management for DeKalb Regional Health System, and then the vice president of revenue cycle for St. Joseph's Hospital of Atlanta, and got back into consulting around 2009. So really excited to share some of what we're seeing in the industry right now.
Great. Thanks again for being here, Valerie. All right, well, let's start our panel discussion. Ron, why don't you start us off, and I'll ask you the first question. Let's just start with, have you seen an increase in consumer demand for contactless payments over the year? And if so, with COVID cases declining and vaccinations ramping up, do you expect to see that digital demand experience continue?
Yes. So we did see an increase with the contactless payments prior to COVID. The fintech industry had found its way in healthcare, and so we did see a slight decline within two of our multi-vertical markets. And let me just clarify our vertical market. So within healthcare, each vertical consists of an area of within healthcare. So you have your admitting areas, your clinics, parking garages, cafeterias, back office, and so forth. So there's a wide variety. So we did see an increase, but due to COVID, that's accelerated, especially in our patient-facing areas, such as clinics and our admitting areas, or clinics in our admitting areas. But oddly enough, we did see the largest increase was in our cafeterias. Although we didn't have a lot of patients or family members coming through the cafeteria, once we allowed the elective surgeries to resume, we did see a high demand in contactless payments. And so now that the numbers are going down, I do see that the demand hasn't decreased. It's actually increased due to the fact that the ease of patients and even our consumers within our cafeterias, our lodging areas, and even within our gyms, in our practices, the friction or the contactless payments just seems to work for that group. So I do not see it slowing down anytime soon.
Great. Rebecca, what are you seeing out there? Are you seeing those trends?
Yeah, pretty similar to Ron. And we actually did see, I would say, a bit of a wave when it came to contactless payment utilization. Obviously, at the onset of COVID, I'm pretty sure the entire industry was pretty dramatically affected when it came to kind of patient payment transactions and that volume, especially with many health systems and practices and providers having to temporarily pause elective services, which we saw start in California about a year ago. So so initially, again, we saw a pretty tremendous shift from card present to card not present, kind of back office and online bill pay transactions. But as soon as facilities started opening up, we did see a pretty tremendous uptick in contactless payment utilization. From a demand standpoint, we've also realized that while many systems have implemented these great secure payment solutions over the years, surprisingly, there are still a lot out there who don't necessarily have the technology stack to support contactless payments, particularly Apple Pay, Google Pay, and all of those NFC payment types that are typically enabled through the devices. So with that, over the past 6 months, we've seen a lot of IT, revenue cycle, and treasury leaders really having to take a step back to reevaluate their entire tech stack to make sure they have what they need to supply those contactless payment channels for their patients on a go-forward basis. So yeah, really echoing Ron's comments. The demand is there, not necessarily a new trend, but certainly one that has been accelerated by COVID.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. And Valerie, I see you nodding your head there. Do you have any insights you want to share or add to that?
Well, no, I mean, I want to echo what Rebecca and Ron said, is that I think COVID made it very apparent that we needed to switch. And so, yes, everybody kind of made this abrupt change, but now it's going to be the expectation. So to Rebecca's point, I think it's the time now to evaluate what we have. Is it going to be what we need for long-term success? But we really can't go backwards because the patients aren't going to let us go backwards. And so, yes, we've seen the demand, the shift, and we keep saying it's time to pause and see if the strategies that you've developed are the ones that are going to be there to help you be successful long-term.
Great, that makes sense. Thanks, Valerie. Now let's discuss the state of revenue cycle and treasury teams supporting patient payment collections. How many of your teams or those of your clients have been working from home, and how many plan to continue supporting a remote workforce environment post-COVID? Clint, let's start with you on that question.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. That's a great question. And really, it's a situation like most systems or hospitals and providers. If you've talked to one, then that one experience is going to be different from everybody else's. So it doesn't matter how many you talk to, it's going to be different. What we did see was that there was this rapid deployment of sending people home and this work from home concept. But then people, struggled with what do we do now? Now that we're starting to open back up, we're bringing people in, we're repurposing people. We need people to administer vaccines and things like that. And so there's been this scramble, if you will, to try to figure out, one, do we have the technology to continue to support it? And number two, do we have really the appetite, if you will, for the patients and administration to really make that stick? And so I think right now is the time. Valerie and I talk about this a lot. Just the last 18 months, we've done a lot out of urgency, and now it's time to take a step back and look at everything from a sense of strategy. And so I think that's what a lot of people are doing, is saying, hey, our teams are still home. How do we keep them there? How do we repurpose people in a way that's meaningful and valuable for the system? So a large number did do that and embrace the work from home immediately, and they had to. And then it's this process of figuring out, what do we do now and how do we handle it? And contactless payments and a lot of the other digital patient technology is going to be a big piece of that, but still a lot of decisions to be made, in my opinion.
Thanks, Clint. Ron, what are you seeing out there? What are your teams? How are your teams handling this?
I think just to echo what Clint said, so because of COVID, our rev cycle teams did work from home, and we had to quickly come up with a few things. We had to ensure that all the controls are implemented and are in place to allow them to work from home from a PHI perspective and PCI compliance. So once we were able to put those controls in place and then look at any other mitigating factors to prevent fraud, we felt that we've now established a pretty good work model for our rev cycle partners to work from home. But the challenge is, now that everything is opening back up, to echo Clint's comments, we do have to take a step back and see what our work environment will look like moving forward. Can we optimize, or now that the spaces that we've had before have condensed and I guess shrunk, so to speak, just for the sheer fact that there was no one in the offices. What will that look like moving forward? How are our rev cycle partners, are they going to be happy with sharing office space a day in and day out? And then secondly, how do we compete with other rev cycles, or even or how do those employees, how do we keep them satisfied if they have potential opportunities to stay at home, if we are going to start bringing people in? So there's numerous challenges that we have to deal with, not only internally, but also looking at from a competitive market. So it's going to be an interesting time over the course of the next 4 to 6 months as we open up. But I think for us, from a leadership standpoint, we are going to take a step back and reevaluate to make sure what we implement will be something that's going to be long-standing, not just for the interim.
Right. And Rebecca, how are your teams handling the remote workforce environment?
Our teams are great remote. For our clients, I know it's definitely been somewhat, a challenging journey for some, but I think all in all, it really has shaken up what a lot of healthcare providers have realized they needed from some of their vendors. I think by and large, the market's been pretty adaptable, but I think one area where we saw a pretty tremendous shift to work from home, where we expect that to stay the course, is for a lot of our clients that are kind of third-party billing or collection partners, early out vendors. So that's been a pretty big emphasis for those types of clients. So yeah, but otherwise, echo the comments from the rest of the group.
Great, thank you. All right, well, let's move on to our third question of the panel discussion. And Valerie, let's start with you on this one. What have you seen as the biggest challenge for health systems in trying to adapt to the growing demand for contactless patient engagement strategies and a more digital payment ecosystem?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I see with some of my clients is they're making decisions in silos, and those decisions aren't maybe part of a bigger strategy. And while I think this is great, but we frequently, I can tell you story after story about how we'll be talking to one part of an organization, and then we'll start talking to the other, and they don't know what each other's doing. And so I think we really have to think of this as the true revenue cycle and making sure that we get all the right people in the room to make sure that we're making the right decision for the organization. So it might take you a little bit longer to get through that process, but the buy-in and then making sure every part of the organization is connected and that we don't have any hiccups. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I see is this wanting to react quickly, but not getting all the right stakeholders in the room to make sure it's successful at the end of the day.
Right. Clint, can you elaborate on that? Are you seeing kind of the same situation?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm so frustrated, if I get one more CFO that called me and say, "Hey, ambulatory went out and bought, this system, and we don't want it. How do I unwrap?" It's this constant. The silos is a perfect example that Valerie said, but it's not just silos. I think it's also this. I mentioned earlier the whole idea of strategy. Making sure that you're getting the right solution, that it's fully integrated. You don't need 14 different bolt-ons to do what needs to be done today. And, I think we're probably going to talk about this in a few minutes, but the cat's out of the bag. Patients have now seen some of the things that healthcare is capable of doing, like touchless and contactless, and I can wait in my car, and that we're not going back. I mean, we're starting to create that consumerism model, and that's what people are going to expect moving forward. So I think the challenge right now is going to be, how do I take what I did in a scramble over the last 12, 15 months and then correct it and make it right and make it work the way I want to for our system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And that definitely leads into our next question. Like, what technologies are you looking at? What decisions are being made? So Rebecca, that question goes to you. And what type of technologies are you seeing being deployed with healthcare providers to support patient engagement across the board, with a focus on contactless strategies? Could be something new or something that you're just seeing is more common now.
Yeah, and Clint probably has some great insights here, because I know AccuReg has recently deployed some really excellent solutions to support contactless kind of patient engagement and pre-registration. But from kind of a technology essence at its core, in terms of what's being deployed kind of on the payment side and patient financial engagement side, I wouldn't say the technology is incredibly new and different. It's really technologies that we've seen successfully deployed in retail and other industry verticals that we're now finally seeing mobilized and adapted within the healthcare ecosystem. So I think texting and patient financial engagement via text is huge. We've seen that as a pretty significant interest to our clients, and has been well adapted by their patients, and really has the power to drive some significant ROI in terms of accelerating time to first payment. For example, improving patient financial engagement and NPS scores across the board. So that's been a big one. I've also seen kind of like the reinsurgence of some older technologies, payment IVR, for example, not necessarily new tech, but has totally taken on like a new life of its own since COVID hit, because it's been this scrappy strategy to allow reps to collect from home without having to rely on devices, which I know we'll talk about here in a bit. So yeah, in essence, from a tech standpoint, as it relates to payments, nothing super new and different, but great to see all of this finally being adopted within the healthcare ecosystem.
Great, thanks. Clint, are you seeing anything else you want to add to that from your point of view?
I guess without doing an AccuReg commercial, one of the things that we've seen is that, there's a lot of new stuff popping up. That's one piece of it. So you need to really vet what's out there. But, really just taking a step back and being able to say, okay, what's right for us? And there are solutions out there that will allow you to do so much more with one solution rather than having to piecemeal. And so whether you've been using this technology for a couple of years or whether it's new for you in the last 12, 18 months, I would just really challenge you to get out there and relook based on what your strategy is and what the patient wants. And exactly what Rebecca said, the consumerism model was built by retail and by banking and by the airlines and travel. And so, patients expect that. And so now that we've started tiptoed in that direction, we're going to have to continue to embrace it. And that the solutions are out there. It's just finding the right one that can be fully integrated with your solution.
Great. Thanks, Clint. All right. Well, let's move on to our next question. And Ron, let's start with you on this question here. What are your thoughts on the future of hardware and payment devices in healthcare? Do you think traditional hardware devices are needed for the future of healthcare payments now that we've talked about these new or old technologies that are emerging?
Yes and no. So as I mentioned, and just to go back to what Rebecca and Clinton have mentioned in regards to technology, I absolutely agree with everything they said. And now that we dipped our toe in the water, the consumer is actually absolutely going to expect that, at least in healthcare, that we continue to evolve. But that said, there are areas within our healthcare systems, in our clinics and so forth, where our patients aren't very technology savvy. They do not have the ability to register online or go online. We also we service a whole different group of folks that may not be, again, as I mentioned, technology savvy. So what do you do for them? And so we do have to rely on the brick and mortar type payments for that patient group. However, that said, because the industry, the market, our consumer, and due to COVID, has pushed us in an environment where we have no choice but to accept NFC payments, we absolutely have to evolve. As I mentioned, we have so many different verticals. So for example, in our restaurants, we are now piloting the QR code method. We have a true cafeteria where we can just do NFC, but we also have cafeterias that are like a true restaurant. So there, we don't have menus, but we do have the QR codes. Same as within our ERs and our clinics, NFC contactless, that's going to be here to stay. So that said, we do have to move, we do have to shift and keep an eye on the future. But I do want to stick to what, or actually take a step back again to what Valerie and Clint mentioned about doing things in silos because of what's happening. They are absolutely right that my experience within Common Spirit Health, there has been a lot of decisions made in silos. And that's because of what I call a disruptor. Some of these companies are disruptors and they provide a service for that particular silo. And a decision is made to go with that particular disruptor. But however, how does that impact everybody else? It's going to absolutely disrupt how we process and how the workflow of standardization. And so one of the things that I want to encourage all third party or even certain companies that have a solution is that you have to look at a solution that's going to encompass not just that particular vertical, whether it's a cafeteria, parking garage, back office, but look to see how it's going to evolve throughout the rest of the organization. That's going to be the key. And I think that's going to be the challenge because again, right now, having a disruptor in every single silo is going to be difficult to manage. You cannot standardize. It poses a risk operationally, and it definitely poses a risk from a PCI stack. So one of the things is again, to answer your question, Matt, we certainly will be moving forward off the brick and mortar. Oh, I'm sorry, keeping our brick and mortar, but moving forward to more of the higher end technology for NFC payments and contactless payments. But again, we need to start having discussions with those disruptors to see how they can evolve and service the entire organization as opposed to each specific silo.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Hey, Natalie, I wanted to make a real quick point to piggyback off of what Ron just said. And this is anecdotal, but I was working with a client who made a decision to go to the touchless payment without really evaluating the full impact to the organization. And we came in after the fact, but what it was a $3 million a month decision to them, not really taking into account those people who cannot go that route, who weren't willing to go that route. And so they were losing $3 million a month in cash that they were getting from the old-fashioned way of doing business. So they didn't really think through that transition. And I think to Ron's point, you're going to still need to have that old-fashioned way of doing things because there's going to be a part of the population that doesn't have bank accounts, that doesn't have the technology. And you may not think that it's that much, but they made this decision without a business case and it was $3 million a month. And I'm like, you don't want to rethink that one. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. That puts it in a perspective.
To piggyback on that, I think on the flip side, I think one thing that we're hearing from a lot of Treasury leaders specifically, and Ron, interested in your thoughts here. I mean, payment devices, including those that support NFC, they're great. They're definitely helping to bring that more retail-like experience to the kind of healthcare checkout and payment experience, but they can be a pretty significant capital expense, especially for a large health system or organization, especially when you're kind of churning through devices every 6+ years. So, you know, I definitely think that, per Ron's comments, we'll continue to see devices as like a, I hate to say necessary evil in kind of clinics and call centers to an extent. And, you know, I'm sure all the major manufacturers will continue to release kind of new devices that have, you know, their own unique value add in terms of improving collections, improving security posture. With that said, I do think that the days of having to purchase 2,000 new devices every 6 years are maybe not coming to an end, but I don't think we'll have to see like the magnitude of investment that systems have seen historically over the next 5 to 10 years. Something to think about. I don't know, Ron, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but
you're right. You are absolutely right. And that, I think that's one of the benefits of, at least for us, for partnering with Salucro, because we are able to do just that, is have the traditional payment model on one side of the house, but also keep an eye or a foot on the other with the future, and making quick right turns whenever we need to when it comes to NFC payments and the adaptability. And it's funny that you mentioned IVR, because we're now implementing IVR again. That's something that I thought we were going to go away from, but no, nonetheless, it's coming right back. So no, I absolutely agree with Rebecca.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks, Rebecca. All right, that was a good question, guys. Let's move on to our next question. And Clint, let's start with you on this one. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for contactless payment innovation in healthcare? Can you discuss the mix of collections across revenue cycle engagement points, and how maybe it's shifting from pre-service, time of service, or post-service?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's really two parts to that. One is, are you going to have one solution or multiple solutions? That's one part of it. But then going back, even piggybacking on the question we just wrapped up, and that is that patients expect a good digital experience. There was a study 3 years ago, before the pandemic in 2018, that Black Book Market Research did, and it said that 90% of patients are willing to leave you and go to a different provider if you don't have a good digital technology experience. In other words, if it doesn't look and feel like my retail experience, and I won't mention company names, but if it doesn't look and feel like what I do on my phone when I order, whatever I need and it's shipped to my house, or the way I book my Delta flights and things like that, then they're going to look for it somewhere else. So every time I have a treasury person or a CFO that says, hey, we just want Max Wipes, they're cheap and easy, I have to step back and say, well, what would you expect if you were in that situation? Would you want to tap your card, or would you, all these different things? And they go, well, okay. And then maybe they'll step back and reevaluate and say, well, if it's in a self-service area, then let's do this. If it's, with a registrar, that kind of thing. And so being able to look at that more objectively, I think that's really important. So there's a couple of different ways to look at it, but I think we're definitely going to have a lot of opportunity to really evaluate where we're going because of digital patient engagement. And then that goes back to the first point that I made. And, are you going to have one solution for your financial side that goes end to end, and then maybe have a clinical piece? So how are you going to engage with that patient? Because to my knowledge, there is no clinical tool that yet does everything on the financial side and the patient engagement, intake, and access side. And so you're looking at least 2 solutions, maybe 3 or 4, depending on how you build it. So a lot of opportunity for really stepping back and looking at what you want to accomplish and how you're going to get there.
Great. Thanks, Clint. And Valerie, what do you think? Anything to add to that?
Well, I'm a huge advocate and have been even before COVID and all of this, that we've got to get as much as possible pre-service. A good rule of thumb is that for every 30 days you have a balance due to you from a patient, you lose 30% collectability. So first of all, we're just letting our cash deteriorate if we don't move it as far up the chain as possible. But it's also a customer satisfier. If we can take care of them prior to arrival, this is one less stressor that they need to have when they're sitting there waiting for their appointment. Clint and I talk about this all the time. This is the worst thing happening to them. So if we can financially close the book and get everything taken care of beforehand, it's not only a win for the facility because we've actually got that revenue, but it's a win for the patient too, because it's just one less thing that they have to worry about and their experience is better. So as much as we can, push to the forefront. And this really is one of those things, like you probably have more opportunity to do that than you realize. So it's really understanding your data, understanding how far in advance these patients are on the schedule, and then implementing not only the processes, but having the right tools to enable your people to take care of the patients. So.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Ron, any insights you want to add to that?
Sure. I absolutely agree with Valerie on this one. One of the initiatives we had here at Common Spirit Health and even at Dignity pre-COVID was re-educating our patients on the ability to collect payments beforehand. So we did start the process of looking at registering online prior to your appointment. We have an opportunity to have the numerous ways of checking in. They can pay on their phone while they're in the waiting room. We have kiosks installed where they can just, when they come in, they check in and they can pay right then and there without ever going to the front desk. So that's something that we've talked about, not only talked about, but implemented prior to COVID. But that said, we do want to capture those payments up front. We have found that trying to capture payments post-visit is a challenge. And to Valerie's point, we do lose money at the end of the day. And so one of the things that we are trying to do, continuously to do, is now educating our patients or helping them rethink how to do this process by sending out emails and texts prior to. They can set up a payment schedule if they need to, 30 days in advance. They can pay a week in advance now. And so now that we're proactively reaching out to our patients prior to the visit, and hopefully we'll see a change in behavior in capturing that payment up front.
Right. I agree. Using those proactive touch points could definitely help improve collections. Rebecca, anything else you want to add to that before we get to our final question of our discussion today?
No, not really, but Valerie totally hit the nail on the head with that one, and I agree. This might be a topic for like a totally separate webinar, but Ron, I'm maybe at a later date interested in your thoughts on, as we're moving more towards pre-service, kind of how you guys are planning for that shift of card present versus card not present mix and the underlying impacts to interchange there, but deeper topic maybe for another day.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, great. Well, let's wrap up our discussion today with just one more quick question for everyone on the panel. Just want to hear what your general predictions are for contactless payment trends in the future. What's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and what does that mean for revenue cycle teams, treasury teams, and supporting technology platforms? Valerie, let's start with you.
No, I think the future is really exciting right now. We talk frequently that COVID was a catalyst. I think a lot of us in the revenue cycle have been wanting to change for years, but there's just not been that burning platform for change. So it's here. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see this fundamental shift in how we do business. And, in my head, I think it's going to look really nice. It's going to be this virtual experience for the patient. They're going to be better educated about why they're paying us. They're going to have better tools. And then it's going to be financially more beneficial to us. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a radical change in how we're engaging with the patients in this pre-service component and in relation to how they pay us.
Great. Rebecca, what do you think is happening in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Valerie. In addition to that, from kind of focusing in on contactless payment trends, I think in the next 10 years, maybe not 5, maybe 10, we could very well see contactless payment transactions supersede volumes that we're seeing for traditional cash and swipe card payments today. We see a lot of this in the different international markets that we serve, including over in India, where there are various digital and e-wallets that tends to be kind of the preferred healthcare payment method. So I think we'll continue to see a shift in that mix and continued growth in contactless transactions. I also think that we may see some stronger alliances and integrations between a lot of the major HSA and FSA administrators with some of the more popular e-wallets. I think that that's like a hopeful trend on the 5-year healthcare horizon.
Interesting, thanks. Clint, what do you see? What are the trends happening in the next 5 to 10 years that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting if you take a step back from just the payment piece of it. You know, there's been a lot that's happened in the last 15 months, and a lot of new companies have popped up. So I think there's going to be a couple of dynamics. One, you're going to see more consolidation. Healthcare is already contracting and has been. It's gotten even hotter in the last 6 to 12 months. And so you're gonna have all these new startups that, hey, we can do this one little piece, we can do this one. Well, those pieces need to be put together, and so the market will drive that. And so I think you're going to continue to see, which is frustrating for a lot of providers, you're going to continue to see, you know, companies changing names and becoming this and getting gobbled up by the big guys and things like that. So that's one piece of it. The other piece, and we've all mentioned this on some level, but you're going to continue to have this consumerism expectation from the patient. You're going to continue to have an expectation now that shopping is required through price transparency. You're going to have this expectation that I can shop from my own services, I can direct my own care, I can pay any of 16 different ways that Salucro lets me pay. You know, so there's all these different things that are going to become expectations, and there's absolutely no going back. There's no unraveling that. And so, you know, you're going to see a lot of systems that are going to continue to change and work out the kinks and find the right partners and continue to consolidate and integrate. And I think that's going to be the key to really the success for the provider and for the patient is integration and consolidation. And above all, I would just remind you as a provider, if you're listening to this, it's all about the patient. If you're not doing these things and making these decisions with the patient at the center of those decisions and those strategies, then you're missing the whole point. And so just keep that in mind, because they want to be able to pay in as many different ways as they can in the way that they're most comfortable and most used to. And, you know, it might be like my dad, and he still wants to write a check, you know, so things like that we have to keep in mind. We actually had a conversation about this the other day, and it's not just age related. Somebody actually corrected me, and she's a provider that's using a lot of digital patient engagement. And it's not just a generational thing. It actually goes into play more. Socioeconomic plays into it. There are a lot of factors that play into this approach and being able to have, you know, different approaches for different people. So not just generational. I was just making fun of my dad. So with that, there's a lot to come and a lot of changes. And I think everybody's at a point where they're going to take a step back and continue to refine the decisions they've made in terms of how we're going to accept payments, when we're going to accept payments. And of course, my motto has always been the best time to accept payment from a patient or to ask them for payment is every chance you get. So if we can spread that out across revenue cycle and move it further upstream, we're winning. Thanks,
Clint. And Ron, what are your predictions for the next 5 to 10 years?
Wow. Well, I saw it. Our wonderful panel, they've covered it all. I mean, great insight. So I can only echo with what everyone said. But absolutely, this now that we've gone this way, over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, contactless payments, more advanced way of paying, more options of payments is definitely going to be the trend. That's where we're going. And because healthcare has always been, not always first to the party, now that it's an untapped market, or so to speak. So Clint is absolutely right. There are a lot of new companies coming in and just hitting the ground running, trying to provide service for those individual markets or those individual silos or verticals. So I would love to see, so here's the challenge in that. I would love to see what Rebecca had said earlier about these alliances. So hopefully these smaller companies will form alliances with some of the bigger players in the market, as far as the processors, the gateway providers, and more importantly, the point-to-point encrypted providers, because compliance is a huge issue. And so as fast as this thing is going to grow, I caution those who are listening, because this is a stance that we take here at Dignity. Even though this machine looks great and it does wonderful things, and it can cook my breakfast, make a payment, and clean my car, all that fun stuff. How secure is it though? How secure is this product? One of the things we do want to make sure before we dip our toe in that water, we want to do our due diligence to ensure that not only is our patient data protected, but more importantly, are the credit card data protected. So we all have to do our due diligence in ensuring that compliance is as bulletproof as can be. But then also on the side of that is not to forget about the cost of doing business. A lot of this is new and it looks great, but let's not forget to take a look at the fine print. Let's not forget to take a look at that contract to see how much is this going to cost your business. Is there a per transaction fee? Is there a percentage? Just all the little nominal fees that are going to be listed. And what are the terms in the agreement? Are you committed for the next 20 years, 15 years? I mean, how does that look? So again, all this looks great, but let's not forget to look under the hood to make sure that engine is bulletproof and running smoothly. So I do agree that we are going to take off running, but let's do ourselves a favor in healthcare. And it's okay not to be first, but let's make sure that we do our research and due diligence and do it right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, guys, thank you so much. That's a lot of great information I think we covered today. I learned a lot. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. Your insights and experiences were really great to hear. I hope everyone listening enjoyed our panel discussion today. Don't forget to download our ebook and have a great rest of the week.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Nice chatting with you. Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks.
See ya.